Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here with one of the young brains of this country who actually participated in the research, particularly of this incredible book called The Strength Mythology Demystified. And I wanted us to have a debate, not a debate as such, but a discussion of perhaps the issues of homosexuality in Uganda per se. And I will pose a few questions and then we'll have some arguments. We are making projections of what is likely to be in terms of the present scenario in Uganda. We are aware that Parliament has now, by virtue of, I think it was Honorable Asman Basalira, who, private members bill, right, has now asked Parliament to make a law curbing the issue of homosexuality. I know that this is the second time perhaps that this bill or this act is coming into resonance. The first time it came, it was by Bahati, is that right? Yeah. Honorable Bahati, and it was struck down on a question of technicality. So in other words, there was no quorum, substantive quorum, and the courts interpreted that without quorum, it was not eligible to be a law. So it was thrown out on the basis of quorum. But we're also aware that so many cases have been had in this country on the question of homosexuality. So without pointing fingers, we're not pointing fingers at any particular individual. We are just having an intellectual debate in terms of the propositions of the projections that are likely to ensue out of this homosexuality bill, if you like. Do you think this bill will be signed and assented to by the president?
Most likely, because the president has a record of maintaining his position against homosexuality.
You need to be loud a bit, sir.
Most likely, the president will assent to the bill because he has a record of maintaining his position against homosexuality, it being against the African morals as he believes. But now maybe the question would be, would it sustain, would it survive the constitutional petitions as the prior one succumbed to the constitutional court ruling that it was unconstitutional? So
why do you think the president, other than the fact that you've probably had him say these statements in public that, listen, we are not against homosexuals, we are just against them imposing their ideals on us. Why do you think, other than those public declarations, why do you think the president will assent to this bill?
Well, the bill has come out at a time when there is a lot of heat on the topic of homosexuality. There is a lot of pressure. It has been a matter of concern for quite a time, a long time now, in that the different members of parliament are trying to come out and try to maintain the stronghold against homosexuality. So I think the president will assent to the bill basically because that is what the public demand is calling for.
Okay, when you say public demand, are you arguing in terms of public policy, public morality?
Exactly.
And is there a judicial basis for that?
Well, yeah, there is a judicial basis for that. When you look at the case of Jacqueline Nava Grace versus Anthony General, despite the fact that court recognized the LGBT rights to freedom of association, the judge in that particular case maintained that as much as these people have their rights to freedom of association, based on public morality, what they were going to engage in is against public morality, and court went on ahead and pronounced itself against that particular position. It made reference to the seemingly similar position in the Wolf Eden Committee report of 1954, published in 1957 by Lord Delvin and then Professor H.L.A. Hart against the position of private morality by John Stuart Mills. Well, John Stuart Mills argued that as long as two consenting males engage in homosexual behavior in their private setting, if they're not interfering with anyone in the public realm or in the public space, that would be right, and that it would be wrong to criminalize such an act or setting. On the other hand, we'll delve in, and Professor H.L. Hart argued that if that is to be allowed, then there would be disintegration in the society, in the natural order of society, in that we are going to have different sects of people engaging in different sexual orientations. For example, if the gay can thrive in their private morality, if the lesbians can do the same, meaning we are going to have a lot of people coming up, different sects coming up. Let's say we're going to have the transgenders, we are going to have the people who engage in pedophile, bestiality, and so on, coming up saying that this is our private morality. So the end effect of it is that now the public claim will be affiliated with these different sects of private moralities. So it would be wrong to maintain the argument of private morality. What I would go with is actually public morality.
I agree with you when you say that, although my only concern with that is that the judge was very clear in that case of the Navagesera issue, where he said that the right to associate, freedom of association, freedom of assembly, freedom of expression is a right that is constitutionally provided for, right?
Yes.
Under Article 44. Is that right?
Freedom of expression, Article 29.
29. And Article 44 talks about the non-derogable rights, right?
Yes.
But it creates an exception, and it says that the exceptions are that in spite of the fact that you have these rights enshrined and provided for by the Constitution, these rights are not non-derogable. They are not absolute, right? So he made that disclaimer, if for lack of a better word, and said you may have that right, but that right can be limited because it offends the rights to public policy or the morals, as he rightly put it.
Yes.
And that's how the case got where it is today.
Yes.
So those are two cases. One case propounded by Namagesera still in terms of arguing that the unconstitutionality of the Homosexuality Act, but it was thrown out on a technicality, right?
Yes.
And then this one argued in terms of the proposition that public policy were paramount vis-a-vis those other rights of those individuals. I think that's a position that is absolute.
Yes.
Now, that means that the Constitution makes serious undertakings in terms of the right to a marriage as provided for under Article 31, right?
Yes.
And also Section 145 of the Penal Code Act makes the act of homosexuality punishable.
Yes.
Not so. So why then is Parliament interested in passing another bill if we think that these laws are substantive enough to capture what is already existing in public?
Well, I think what Parliament is trying to do is panic, and it is rushed in that we have had an act already providing for the same. It has been challenged. What I would rather maybe think Parliament should have done is finding out how to make sure that the laws we have in position, for example now Article 31, Clause 2A, prohibits same-sex marriage, with effect that homosexuality is among the same and it would be illegal to engage in the same. The Penal Code Act under Section 145, as you have stated, provides for the same. So that means that there is already the law which is in place against that particular vice. It would be a matter of now enforceability. How is it being enforced, other than coming out with another legislation, because it is duplicating what is already there.
Do you see a challenge? Because you see, listen, I am thinking that there's something bigger than what is happening today.
Yes.
Because if Parliament, like you said, out of panic, fidgets around and said, okay, let's make another law because we want to address this issue. Obviously, because of so much alarm that is happening in the country in terms of the replications of these issues, in terms of the different schools that you've had, that, how it has been indoctrinated in schools and how the president has come out to affirm. What is the position of the Kenyan vis-a-vis Ugandan position? Why am I bringing that in question? Because the Kenyans had a challenge in Eric Gutari versus NGO board, right?
NGO board, yes.
where they are arguing and they're saying, listen, we are, even their constitution also has those provisions, like you rightly said, it is punitive against homosexuality.
Yes.
But then the court agreed with LGBT and said, listen, these are their rights.
True.
So where is the diversion now coming in?
Well, now, to my understanding, the diversion comes in based on the interpretation of sex. Because when you read the non-discrimination articles, both in the Kenyan Constitution and the Ugandan Constitution, for the Kenyan case, it is Article 36. For the Ugandan case, it is Article 21. The substance of the same is that no one should be discriminated on the grounds of sex and gender.
Very true.
Well, now what the Kenyan court does, what the majority justices do in the Supreme Court case of Eric Gitari versus National, versus the NGO Board of Kenya,
yes,
is that they give an holistic and extensive interpretation of sex to include sexual orientation based on various international conventions.
Very true.
To be specific, the justices, the land justices, make reference to the European Convention of Human Rights, specifically Article 8 to Article 11, where sex orientation is defined to where sex rather is defined to include sexual orientation. And I would also seemingly refer to the case of Kimberly Hively of 2015,
yes,
where the plaintiff was a lesbian, and she came out and she made proclamations like coming out of the closet, as they term it, showing the public that she is lesbian. And based on that, she suffered discrimination at workplaces, and she actually petitioned and sued in court under the Title 7, or the Title 7 Act, which provided against discrimination based on sex. When the case was being dismissed, court highlighted that when that particular act was being made in 1964, sex only made sex.
Absolutely.
It did not include sexual orientation.
Which is the same position of the law of Uganda now, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
Under the Constituent Assembly, like when they were coming up with the Constitution, probably sex as then was only sex without sexual orientation.
Yes. So there was judgment entered to that effect?
Yeah, judgment was entered to that effect, and the case was dismissed. But later on, the case was reinstated in 2016.
Yes.
Where Justice Posan came out and said that in 1964, sex was only sex. But now, to date, like trends have changed in that sex now includes sexual orientation. So I think the Kenyan counterparts adopted the same. The land justices adopted that particular understanding and interpretation, in that while drafting the constitution, the framers or the makers
hadn't anticipated that.
They didn't anticipate
yes,
to include sexual orientation in their law.
So I see a danger coming, and permit me for using those words loosely,
yes,
in the sense that the anti-homosexuality bill is likely to take an affirmative form of sorts, because then they would argue and say, especially if they link it on Article 31, right?
Yes.
And also on the true interpretation of Section 145.
Yes.
Because now the definitive part here is going to be in terms of, can you explain to us what a gender is? Can you explain to us what a difference between sex and a sexual orientation? Because now you just rightly said in Kimberly versus Harvey, there was a new position adopted because the true interpretation of now sex has got a generous and purposeful interpretation, to use that word again loosely. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, in Obergefell versus Hodges, the U.S. Supreme Court said a people have a constitutional right to marry whoever they want, regardless of their gender. Can you explain that in terms of Ugandan jurisprudence? Is that a true position of law now or not?
Well, in Uganda,
yes,
it's a different position, because as I clearly stated under Article 31, Clause 2A, same-sex marriage is prohibited.
So do you envisage still again a constitutional petition that is now going to hit the anti-homosexuality bill again on that proposition that, listen, the position of marriage now has changed from the position of Hyde versus Hyde, marriage under the Christendom, remember the what? As a relationship between one man and one what? One woman to the exclusion of what? Others. Now we see another adoption or another, what do you call it? Another change of the interpretation of marriage now to include a marriage with whoever or whatever gender. Don't we see now a proposition that now, listen, the president's hands are tied whether he likes it or not, that when this bill comes into force and he assents it, then these people are going to go to court, right? And they're going to court on two issues, on the true interpretation of the word gender. I hope we're not giving them petitions to begin drafting their petitions, because we could actually now be enforcing them and telling them, wait a minute, I think we have not seen it on this ground. Sure. Now, on the basis of the true interpretation of the word sex, vis-a-vis sexual orientation, but also the interpretation of gender, as it were. And now, the bigger problem now is actually now becoming much bigger. You know why? Because we are looking at homosexuality as simply a relationship between two males and male or female, but then there are other people who are captured under LGBT plus, and now there's a Q, queer. So the aspect of bestiality, the aspects of pedophilia, the aspects of gender, and there are quite a number of genders now that are coming into. Aren't you seeing a can of worms of sorts coming up? Isn't this opening a Pandora box? Aren't we finding ourselves equipping the people rather than actually fighting against it as they intend to do?
Well, to start with, what I think should be done is the interpretation of sex should be reinforced, maybe to be limited to sex, maybe gender, because
that's the position of the law now.
Yes,
that's what the law is saying now.
That is why I would rather recommend maybe
that they forget about the bill.
Maybe they should first focus on maybe interpretation of what sex is.
They are clear about that, because they are saying sex is a question of man and what? Woman, not so. And they are saying a gender is male, female.
Okay, for purposes of maybe furthering their fight against homosexuality, let them first maintain that sex is limited to this, and if that is now the position, if there is an interpretation sex on what sex is, and then of course now courts will be obliged to follow the same.
But you see, the bigger problem is that, do you realize that actually the anti-homosexuality people have set a trap for themselves where they're going to fall in without them knowing that they're falling in the trap?
True.
Because now it's going to call for an interpretation of the word sex.
Yes.
Not so. You've argued rightly in Kimberley versus Harvey that now that at a later time was brought back to court, and they said, wait a minute, we are revisiting the other position. Sex is no longer a question of a gender. It's a question of sexual orientation. Okay? And in Obergefell versus Hodges, they're saying, listen, it's not a question of now between a man and a woman. It's a question of whoever, whatever I want. Now we are now going to see other people coming in bestiality. Now you see, like the Baganda say, Mugoba minya, vikele bikola bitya, bisende. Now the bigger problem is that you're saying we are now there's a problem between male and male, female. Bestiality is coming into place. You know? Now, you have done substantive research with the sui generis team.
Yes.
You have discovered that there are certain traits that have been found in animals, right? That have this element of homosexuality.
Yes.
Take us through that.
Maybe before I go to that,
yes.
On the previous point of sex, the definition.
Well,
what I think is now, because all that jurisprudence, Lawrence versus Texas, Tonians versus Asteria, we are seeing Dogent versus United Kingdom, as well as Obergefell versus Hayes. There are international positions which are also reinforced rather in different international conventions.
That's right.
For example, if you look at Article 8 to 11 of the European International Convention of Human Rights, which the land justices in the Kenyan Supreme Court, the El Pitari case, based on, to give a holistic interpretation of sex to include sexual orientation. Well, as I've said, they're international conventions. So I would love to make reference to Article 9
of African Charter,
Clause 2 of the African Charter of Human Rights, which was also considered in the case of
Navagesera.
Yes,
I see. So that is your escape route.
Yeah, that would be my escape route, because that particular article maintains that in as much as individuals have rights to enjoy, they should enjoy and disseminate those rights within the confines of the law. So the question would be, what is the law in Uganda? The law is homosexuality is illegal.
Okay, but they will argue.
Yes.
But you see, that is tied on a public policy, on what the people are saying, not so. So they will argue and say, have you carried out a referendum of sorts to find that the majority of people actually, it is culturally accepted. But to quote Professor Tamale, you were arguing in terms of what Professor Tamale argued in terms of cultural aspects. What was the position? What did she say?
Well, Professor Tamale, she has a learning, or she has a bachelor's
I think a PhD.
Yes, a PhD in anthropology of sexuality, and she argues that coming out and arguing that homosexuality is un-African is simply a sign that you don't know your African background.
So
she goes on to mock these political leaders who use WhatsApp, wear suits, you put on a tie, which is Western according to her, and then at the same time they're arguing that homosexuality is bad. To her it is ironical.
Okay, and to borrow from again the fact that whether or not homosexuality is un-African, we have documented evidence that homosexuality has actually happened in Africa, and the documentation is in respect to the queen of what area is that? Nziga, Congo. That the queen, that queen who was actually homosexual, documented, and then Kabaka Mwanga, is that right? Mwanga, I think the second of Buganda.
Yes.
Although it can be rebutted by the fact that there are those who think that Kabaka Mwanga is just a smear campaign by the British because he was anti-colonialism, and therefore the only thing they could do to actually completely segregate him against his people and society is to argue something that was unacceptable in African culture. In fact, from where I come from, in Busoga, when you are known to practice, not practice homosexuality, but the worst thing that you could probably do in terms of societal evils was to do wizardry, what they call homosexuality. Those homosexuals, when they come and they dance, night dance in your compound, when they got hold of homosexuality, the best punishment they would do is to get matoke, raw matoke, and push it in their anus. Several pieces of matoke.
Yes.
More of an act of sodomy of sorts.
Yes.
To use some honorable gentleman's word is that how can you, maybe I should not use that word here, but the point I'm trying to make is that maybe African culture had understood that this idea of homosexuality was inconceivable, but although we're now seeing Mwanga and then Queen Nziga of Congo doing that, but we have also documented that homosexuality began in Greece and in Rome, right? Yeah. And majorly by these emperors and likes, the kings and likes who actually were doing it to their servants, and homosexuality, other than whether or not it's enjoyable, was argued in terms of a submission. It was a right of a submission where a higher authority would impose their right over a minor authority, and that's why they carried out the act of homosexuality. Although it was also argued, like you pointed out, I remember in our earlier discussion, by militants, people who are in wars, who are exercising war, and as an act of solidarity, where they were away from their families.
Yes.
That is a bit disturbing. So other than that, we don't see a clear manifestation of a right in quotes to an act of homosexuality. That brings me to this begging question of nature versus nurture as a proposition for homosexuality. What do you say about that?
Well, nature versus nurture, basically, it can be linked to the question of what is the etiology of homosexuality.
Uh-huh.
Well, so some people argue that it is natural, or it is by nature that they are homosexual, in that they were born like that, that biologically that is them to be homosexual. That would be termed as the psychogenics, rather the psychogenetics of homosexuality. Well, nature on the other side, it is argued that people are gay because of the environmental factors, because of society, because of the influence. Maybe the friends' peer pressure has against them. Maybe it will be like the financial lackingness of someone, that someone is succumbing to homosexuality basically because of money, or maybe the schools the person has attended.
So the school of nature, let's begin from there, argues in terms of genetics, in terms of DNA. You and I are aware that we've gone through certain reports, scientific reports, which are arguing that it is not genetically possible for a person to be born homosexual in terms of the Y chromosomes or the X chromosome. Although it can be argued that some people may tend to have a higher dose of testosterone, okay, even in females who may ultimately have estrogen or stuff like that, may have a higher, hormones that may cause them to act in an unnatural way within their given mandate of nature. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. What do you say about that in terms of genetics and in terms of scientific proof?
Well, on the aspect of genetics and in respect to scientific views and proof on the same, there are two contradicting positions. The first is that it is argued, according to some scientists, that there is actually a link of homosexuality to someone's genes, in that homosexuality is genetic. In other words, the psychogenetics of homosexuality. They believe that it is because of some hormones or because of someone's genes that he is homosexual. According to the American Research Institute, there is a study which was carried out by Dr. Swab. He examined like a gay person's brain, and he found a high level of a hormone called hypothalamus, which was a lot compared to a straight man. When he compared it to that in a straight woman, he found that it was matching. So that would maybe point out to the fact that maybe a straight woman and a gay man have the same chemical levels. I think that is what that particular study arrived at, but he maintained the position that it is genetic. Then later on, research conducted by the Pew Research Center comes out and highlights that there is no link of genetics to homosexuality. It carries out various studies. Well, in rebutting the earlier study, they highlight that the studies were conducted on dead bodies, apart from the real, like the alive people, because the peer research, it carried out questionnaires, it asked the people, it got the public understanding of homosexuality, and most of them actually pointed to the nature position, that it is environmental. There is an environmental influence to that same.
And that's the same position of the Ugandan scientist, I think, who gave the report to the president, and that's why the president, in the first time, assented and put his signature and said, I think the scientists have advised that this has nothing to do with genetics, it is something that is societal and therefore an issue of nurture as opposed to nature.
True. Yeah, the Ugandan scientists are in the same position with the second position of the international scientists, that homosexuality is not genetic. They carried out our research. They also consider the aspect of homosexuality in animals, though their finding on that was that there are no homosexual animals, which is, however, not the position.
Because
you find out.
You and I argued last time, and we found out, even in this book, that we have made those discoveries that they're quite a number of species of animals that actually do engage in quote-unquote homosexual activities. And you can take me through some of them.
True. There is quite a number of gay characters in animal species, and it is common in those which are next to the human intellectual quotient. Those which are next, if I may put it, our next brothers. They have a higher ranking.
The apes and the gorillas.
Yes. The notably of all is the bonobos. They have a ranking of like about 40% of them. 40% of their sexual interaction is gay. It's homosexual.
And then you talked about penguins as well.
Well, about the penguins, there is actually a couple called Roy and Celo, two males. They identified gay conduct amongst them, and then the zoo owners in Australia gave them an egg to hatch, and they actually hatched the egg. Yeah.
And then we also find it amongst spotted hyenas, and then elephants.
Yeah, elephants, baboons. Though now for the baboons and elephants, there is less penetration. What is common is mounting. In that each time those particular animals are on it, or each time they are frightened, they resort to like sexual interaction.
And what is amazing also in the baboons and the ape-like, those that probably are next cousins of sorts, we also were able to point and discover that the urge of homosexuality amongst them is not instigated because of an affection that they have towards one another, but it's instigated because of circumstances, perhaps anxiety, depression, stress-related stuff, and that's when we see them acting that way.
Yes.
I mean, it's also very clear that even here, when a cow, for example, is on heat, you would see it mounting even a wall or mounting a human being. I've seen it happen several times. And even dogs, female dogs, you see them when they're on heat, they would mount one another. Yes. Others can, even male dogs can come and mount your leg, one leg, you know, exercising that urge of wanting to have the sexual, you know, perhaps fulfillment. Yes. So for us to argue that homosexuality is something that cuts across even those, in spite of the fact that we have seen those traits happening there, is to lessen or perhaps loosen our argument in terms of a discourse that it's a justification for homosexuality amongst creatures, notwithstanding the fact that those are happening. What is the danger of opening up this debate in terms of LGBT? Do you see a danger, and do you opening up a can of worms of sorts when we argue in terms of protecting these rights?
Well, the danger is one, as you had earlier on said, that you're giving them grounds for maybe petitioning, is that we are finding out their weaknesses or the shortcomings in the vice itself, then the loopholes in the law which they may take advantage of, as you had said. For example, now the aspect of sex, where they can come out with a petition and maybe challenge the interpretation and push for an inclusive interpretation to include sexual orientation, or we have pointed out provisions which are against homosexuality, which can come to their attention, and then maybe they can prepare petitions to challenge the same. So I think that is the danger of opening up such a debate.
And then the other thing perhaps we would like to argue is in terms of the consequences, likely consequences of this act of homosexuality. Because we believe, as we are told to believe, that it is an act against the order of nature. And therefore it has consequences. Yes. What are some of the consequences of the act of homosexuality?
Well, if we are all to engage in homosexual behavior, arguing that it is natural and it's normal as they propound, because it's settled that it's not procreative, those particular sexual activities are not procreative. So if the world thrives or it survives on procreation, in that the population keeps on increasing because people are engaging in procreative sex.
Mm.
If the whole world pauses and we are to engage in homosexual behaviors, they have an argument that if they want to adopt, they can. Rather, if they want to have kids, they can adopt. If we all resort to adopting and without anyone in the I see it as like manufacturing. If there is no one doing the procreation and people are no longer giving birth, the likes, I think it would create a population imbalance, and then the human race would be extinct to some point.
Okay, and that's one of the things. But the other perhaps is in terms of the activity itself, because we see that it has elements to do with colonal cancer, they call it anno substitution, where they have cancers that can develop around them, and then others that have to do with emotional imbalances that cause depression, suicidal defects that are likely to arouse because of lack of acceptance, or perhaps that's why they make these, and then they easy infliction of disease, HIV, syphilis, and other aspects that are easily got when you engage in act of homosexuality.
Yes.
Not to mention the other side, where recently we saw certain grostic WhatsApp that were moving around, where they were pulling big chunks of wood from males, anal parts, whether or not that was intentional, it was something that was an accident or something, raises a lot of questions and concerns. But for Uganda per se, do you think this is something that can be embraced by the populace, or you think it is again, to use other people's words, foreign and therefore unacceptable in African or Ugandan culture?
Well, anyone's reply to that is most likely influenced by his moral understanding or his moral evaluation of sexual impulse. Well, according to me, where I come from, I actually don't think it would thrive, and I would actually maybe not side with it.
By not siding with it, are you the kind of person who believes that what's the other word of counseling? I have my my assistants here. The other counseling, which is either accepting, where they can accept, and then the other where they can. They used to first of all say they accept you, and then what was the two? Tolerance versus acceptance. Yes.
True, I would tolerate them, but I wouldn't accept them.
As a school of thought.
No,
from your own moral perspective.
Yes, my moral
now, if you argue the thriving of homosexuality on religious perspective, or on we have not even mentioned that whether the Bible or the Quran accepts. I know we have quoted the Quran, we have quoted the Bible, and we don't want to, with all due respect, to lessen our argument in terms of those undertakings of what the Bible says, because there are people who don't believe in the Bible, right? There are those who don't believe in the Quran. What best argument would you give to people who neither subscribe to those schools of thought in terms of a rebuttal towards this ideology of homosexuality?
Well, I would talk about the natural order and pattern of everything, of how the world moves. And that automatically brings in procreation. Okay,
and are you saying that there are no people who are not born not to procreate?
Well, then the nature of homosexuality itself is not procreative.
So are you saying every sexual encounter is geared at procreation?
Most certainly, alive to the fact that there are sterile people, those who maybe who have hit their menopause, or because of biological effects, or maybe because of the way they were born, they cannot bear children. But my argument here is,
how about people who are not interested in sex per se? Where would you place them?
The asexuals.
The asexuals, perhaps? people who believe I can be okay. We have not even argued in terms of objectophilia as another element.
Yes.
Yeah, you remember that lady who married the elf of France? Yeah. The Eiffel Tower, and she actually assumed had the name as her first name, and then the other who married the Great Wall of what? China.
Yes.
The aspect of objectophilia. They are not having perhaps the element of sex, as it were, or the affection of sex, but they are saying we are comfortable. So isn't that again giving us, opening a can of worms, like I said, the Pandora box? We are now saying everything that is sexual is now has to be interpreted in terms of proper jurisprudence. And these guys would have a case tomorrow before the courts of law. Yes. Isn't that a challenge for us, for the world today, that now we are losing the world in terms of formality? When perhaps the better argument you're making now would be in terms of order, in terms of intelligence, in terms of pattern, in terms of things as they're meant to be. But wait a minute. Last time I had a debate with my friend who is seated right over there, and he brought me alive to the fact that a gentleman called Stephen Hawking, right, who wrote what was that book?
The Great Design.
The Great, was it The Great Design? The Grand Design. He actually begins by, in his abstract, he begins by making allusions to the scriptures. He says, if the world, this ideology that Joshua made the sun to stand still does not hold water, because if that was so, then the rate at which the world moves, certain things would have lost, resonance, and so many things would have gone wrong. Of course, theologians and apologetics in terms of the law and the Bible would say that is the supernatural, ability of God that makes Jesus walk on water and the likes. But Stephen Hawking and the likes of Einstein and the likes of who is this guy who said gravity, blah blah blah? What was that gentleman? Newton, Isaac Newton, would argue otherwise. So, what is your position in terms of people like that? How would you explain to them, without quoting the Bible, without quoting the Quran, to intelligent creatures like that listen, this act is abhorrible, to use such a word?